President Daniels, members of the Board of Trustees, distinguished faculty, fellow honorees, proud parents, and you who graduated today, I appreciate the honor of addressing you and congratulate you. I hope that in these few minutes, I can broaden your view about creativity in your lives. Most people have a rather narrow view of creativity, but I use creativity much more broadly than that, more broad than the arts and the science and technology. Creativity is the process by which we solve problems, whether they are story, on the job, our relationships with partners, or societal problems. Many people ask, how do you become more creative? I think this is the wrong question. The question is, what are the cultural and interpersonal forces that block creativity and change? The question became important to me because of a puzzling observation that I made back in the 1980s. It was near Silicon Valley, and there was a pattern that I noticed. Somebody would have a creative idea. They'd get some backing, they'd put together a good team, they'd get funding, they'd have good execution, they'd make a big impact, they would go public, they'd get access to the best engineers and access to customers and the most interesting problems. These were very creative environments, companies like Silicon Graphics and Sun Computer. They were the Facebook and Google of their time. These companies were influential and they changed our culture. And then they made some incredibly dumb decisions. Not looking back dumb, but dumb at the time dumb. Some invisible force was blinding them. Now, I knew these people. They were smart, creative, and experienced. But without seeing it or knowing why, these creative people became uncreative. And whatever these forces were, they were hidden and powerful, and they were missed by these companies. But I realized that if they couldn't see their problems, then that meant I probably couldn't see our problems. And you will likely have the same difficulty. How do we face and address problems that we can't see? How do we address our hidden biases? This question was on my mind as we started Pixar. Now, I can't go over all the lessons we learned in 30 years, but there are two bigger lessons that I'd like to go over. The first one is the fragility of new ideas. And my favorite example comes from a movie we made called Up. In the first version, there was a castle floating in the sky. And the people in the castle were at war with the people on the ground. And there was a king and two sons, and the two sons didn't get along with each other. But through some accident, they ended up down on the ground, wandering around in enemy territory. And in their wanderings, they came across a large bird. This version didn't work. It failed. The only thing left was the bird and the word up. In the second version, we came up with a 20-minute prologue which covered the life of Carl and Ellie as they went from childhood up through the death of Ellie. It was very emotional, and we knew in this that we had gold. And after this, Carl floated into the air in his house, and he landed on a lost Russian dirigible. That didn't work. But we kept the prologue. In the next version, they landed on a Venezuelan tepui, where there was this old man, Months, and the reason he was there was that the bird laid eggs, and if you kept eating the eggs, it kept you alive forever. We're now near the end of the time to make the movie, and the magic eggs didn't work. In the final movie, first of all, we lost the eggs. The 20-minute prologue became a 4.5-minute diamond. The final film bore no resemblance whatsoever to the original idea. The path was wildly unpredictable. In truth, all of our movies suck at first. Now, I don't mean this in the sense that I'm being self-effacing or modest. I mean it in the sense that they suck. It's hard because you don't know what it's going to change into. New ideas are fragile and often off track. We had to protect the crew while they were working on something that didn't work, and while they searched for something and they didn't know what it was. Our second lesson rose out of something that has worked and has worked ever since. It's something we call the brain trust. It's the group of directors, story people, and writers that assemble at certain times to help each other. And it is based upon 4 principles. The first one is it's peers talking to peers, filmmaker to filmmaker, not boss to filmmaker or executive to employee. The second principle was to remove the power structure from the room. The director or the head of the project is the one that makes the final decision. And by not allowing anyone in the group to override the director, including the executives or John Lasseter, it frees him or her to listen. They do not come into the room in a defensive posture. The third principle was shared ownership in each other's success. We all make each other better. And the fourth principle was to give and listen to honest notes. Now the question would be, do we live up to our own principles? Usually yes, but not always. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. It's a disaster. The meeting just fails. Egos might get in the way. People learn how to ignore each other's comments. Some people would defer to what they perceive to be the power structure. And then every once in a while, in these meetings, magic will happen. At each one of our movies, there was at least one offsite where there was magic. And by magic, I mean you feel the ego disappear. All attention is on the problem. Ideas come and go without becoming attached to them if they don't work. It is this magic that we should all strive towards. Still, even with this remarkable group, we've had significant failures at some point in each film, including Pixar at one time failing early on and having to restart. And the lessons from these failures led to a few insights, because we had to rethink failure and mistakes. Failure is actually a popular topic recently, and there are a lot of books written about it. You need to fail to succeed, fail fast, and fail early. But we have a problem. There are 2 meanings to the word failure. The first one is a professional one. You try something, it doesn't work, and you learn. And it's a powerful learning tool, and we all recognize it as part of our environments. But there's a second meaning to failure, one that we learned while we were young. If you fail a test, you fail a class, or fail a job, it meant that you didn't work, or that you weren't smart enough, or you screwed up. But this isn't just in school we learn this. Projects fail, companies fail, bridges fail, relationships fail. In politics and business, failures are used as bludgeons to attack opponents. There is a palpable aura of real danger around failure. And this second meaning is deeply ingrained in us. And we mix the 2 meanings. It is almost impossible for most people to separate these meanings emotionally. And we must be consciously aware of the reality and impact of the second meaning, because the combination is interpreted as that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That failure is a necessary evil. But if you understand the difference between the two meanings, you see that failure isn't a necessary evil. It is a necessary consequence of doing something new. And you should always do something new. One of the things that complicates this problem is that there are zero errors that are important in some professions. For instance, in the airline industry, zero errors is important to the manufacturers, it's important to the airline companies, and it's important to you. And in your own actions, you have the desire to get things right the first time. Zero errors is easy to articulate, but most of life is not like this. Imagine that you are leading a 2-hour meeting, and you started off by saying, what we're going to discuss in this meeting is so important that I don't want anybody to say anything dumb. This would be a bad way to start a meeting. Obviously, zero dumb ideas is bad. For one thing, they can stimulate good ideas. But what if somebody gives 40 dumb ideas? Is that okay? Probably not. The person's using all the airtime. They may not know enough. They may not belong in the room. So if 0 is bad and 40 is bad, where between 0 and 40 should we be? I don't know. It is not and cannot be clearly defined. But if we make it safe to operate in this messy space, we allow creativity to flourish. In 2006, there was a new chapter in Pixar's life. We were acquired by Disney. Now, we had watched Disney during the 1990s when they made Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Lion King. And they had rapid, dramatic success. But after Lion King, it went steadily downhill, and it would be 17 more years before they had another great success. So when we showed up at Disney in 2006, they were dispirited and lost. And John Lasseter and I were given the challenge to change Disney animation while keeping Pixar healthy. Upon arriving there, we were welcomed. Because they had failed, they were open and eager to learn. And we didn't know the people, we just knew that the processes and the concepts were wrong. This is actually an amazing opportunity. And we decided to keep them entirely separate from Pixar. We did not want them to be a clone of Pixar. We first had to understand what went wrong in the 90s. When the original leaders left, the most organized people in the building ran production. They were put in charge, and they brought their values with them. And they were focused on efficiency. Creativity was subservient to keeping the whole machinery going. And so we tried to implement two major things. The first was to implement a brain trust. And it took 2 years for that group to earn each other's trust so they would operate well. The second was to change the mindset of production. Their goal was to be a well-oiled machine that didn't make mistakes. And my favorite example was this first movie we were making called Bolt. And the funniest character in there was a hamster called Rhino. But he wasn't animatable. Now, we have in our model characters what we call rigs, and that's what the animators use to control them. And there are thousands of controls. And there were so many controls they couldn't get the film done in time, and we only had 8 months left in which to finish the film. So the animators went to the technical people and said, we need to have you remodel and re-rig this character. And they went back and they said, we can do it, and it will take 6 months. So we're pretty much hosed. So we called the company together and I gave them a talk for an hour. But the basic thrust was, don't ask for permission and don't worry about mistakes. Just figure out what needs to be done and do it. So that weekend, 2 guys worked to re-rig and remodel the character, and in 1 week, the character was back in production. So the question was, why was it that something that took or was predicted to take 6 months, only take 1 week? Everything was in place to protect from making errors. Our job is not to prevent all errors, it is to respond when things go wrong. This is where creativity arises. Since then, each of the 7 films have been critical successes. Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6 being big commercial successes. It is a completely different place with a completely different personality than Pixar. But there are two observations from this experience. The first was that when we got there, we explained the principles in 4 hours, and it didn't make any difference. While the ideas sounded good, it took 4 years for them to actually understand. There is a vast difference between thinking you understand something and actually understanding it. It is easy to state your values and to agree on them. The hard part is asking why you don't live up to them. The second observation is that when we arrived, the studio was considered to be a failure and not creative. Now they are very successful and creative, but they are largely the same people now as there were then. I believe this is the most important point I have to make. The talent was there, we just had to remove the barriers and allow their creativity to flower. If you understand this, you will do better. I believe that everyone has the potential to be creative. It is our choices that block or enable the potential in others and in yourself. Remove the blocks to candor. Make it okay to make mistakes. I'd like to close with a few words about Steve Jobs. I've known him and worked for him probably longer than anybody else. He had a well-known reputation from his early years, which wasn't particularly good. And this was true when he was removed from Apple and when he formed Next and Pixar. These companies both failed. But Steve was so smart that he learned from his mistakes and failures. And 20 years ago, those failures changed Steve. It was like the hero's journey where he was cast out and wandered in the wilderness and came back changed. And while Steve was just as intense, intelligent, honest, driven by quality, passion, and the desire to make a difference, he had developed the ability to listen. He became empathetic with deeper caring. He became kinder and wiser. And since that change, basically everyone who saw it stayed with him for the rest of his life. And it's the reason most people don't know the full story. So many draw the conclusion that the behaviors of the early Steve then led to that revitalized Apple. But that's not what happened. It was the changed Steve who made the new Apple. He put it all together. The change in him was real and deep, and it was a great arc. I hope all of you experience your own personal arcs. There will be ups and downs. You should have the desire to put it all together. There was also a phrase that was used about Steve, which is called the reality distortion field. And I never liked the term because it was used in a rather negative sense. But there is one sense in which I do like it. If you believe, as I do, that your actions make a difference, then this means that you do modify your reality. You do create the future. Steve had an inner desire to make a difference. And for our sakes, I hope that you do as well. Thank you and congratulations to you all.